the gospel is now going to be entering into this phase where it's going to feature the Herodians and the Pharisees and Sadducees trying to stump Jesus, trying to ensnare him in some kind of word trap, like some type of verbal trap. And they're going to do it by asking him what they think are impossible questions for him to answer without getting himself in trouble. There's going to be 3 series of questions. The first question, which we hear about today, is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not? Then the next questions will be about, remember the story about the 7 brides the bride who had 7, who married 7 men and they all died. Man, what kind of bride was she? I don't know, but they all died. And so it's like, whose bride will she be in heaven? And then there's the other one about what is the greatest law? What's the greatest, part of the law? And so those are all 3 questions that are meant to stump Jesus, the incarnate wisdom. And indeed, in his answers to all of them, he will show forth that wisdom. And if you want to kind of appreciate this, I don't know if when you were growing up, I think we all kind of experienced the wise guy or the wise girl, if you will, in class who tries to stump the professor or the teacher, either out of like, being a kind of a jokester, or maybe it's even out of just kind of like a maliciousness. I don't know. But this is what you have here, is you have these Herodians and these Pharisees trying to trip up Jesus, but in a malicious way. They think they're smarter than he is, which is kind of funny when you think about it, but that's the way it is. And what's also interesting is that the Herodians were people who were obviously followers of Herod, and Herod was a sympathizer with Rome. So these were people who were Roman-oriented. They were fans of Rome. And then you had the Pharisees who hated Rome, but they loved Judaism. And so you had this like clash. And so these 2 people despised Jesus so much that they collaborated together. It would be similar if you had a Republican and a Democrat come together on a certain issue, right? That's kind of what it would be like. But that's some of the context. But in this scene, and I really want to try to present the background here because it helps us to really appreciate what's going on, is that in this questioning of Jesus and the impossible, trying to get this impossible question, the struggle here is if Jesus answers, or at least the conundrum, the apparent conundrum, is that if Jesus says, pay the temple tax, then he'll be a friend of Rome but an enemy of the Jews. If he says, don't pay it, then he'll be seen by the Herodians as an enemy and a usurper of Rome. So anyway, this is kind of like the nearly impossible question that Jesus has been given. And so it's interesting to understand Jesus' response. His response was simply to say to them, what? He said, bring me a denarius to look at. And he says, whose image and inscription is this? Why is that important? That's important because of this. I have in my hand a quarter, and on this quarter is a bald man. I think it's George Washington, isn't it? I don't know. But it's probably a picture and an inscription of one of maybe our founding fathers or somebody associated with the founding of America. And on the back, it has another stamp on there of an eagle. It says the United States of America, and written in there, also inscribed, is like e pluribus. I forget what it says in there, but I can't see it on my glasses. But anyway, it has something in Latin written on it. I am terrible on all things American, like American history, so forgive me of this. But anyway, the point of it is that this coin is not like pertinent just to these times. Back in the Roman times, they had their own coins. And as a matter of fact, the Roman emperor would have a coin made and have his own image imprinted on it. And that's interesting because when Jesus says, come and bring me a denarius, and in the Gospel of Matthew, he says, what image and inscription is written on it? In the same scene. And this is important because the word for image in Greek is icon. Icon. And so anyway, this notion of having the image of the emperor stamped on the coin meant that the coin belongs to him. And actually, the coin that was brought to Jesus, the denarius, would have had the image of Tiberius Caesar stamped on it. Why is that important? Because Tiberius Caesar followed after Julius Caesar. So you had Julius Caesar, then you had Augustus Caesar, then you had Tiberius Caesar. Why is that important? Because Julius Caesar was the first Caesar where he was claimed to be divine. Then you had Augustus Caesar, who followed him, who was his son, who claimed to be divine as well. And so on this image of Tiberius Caesar, or actually it's Julius Caesar, then Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar was the son of Augustus. Why that important is because on the denarius it read, the inscription, it was inscribed on there, Caesar Augustus Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. So here you have this, on this coin, an image inscribed on it of the current Caesar, who happened to be Tiberius, and then written on it was basically Caesar Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus, like son of God. It's kind of what it says. And so it's interesting because Jesus kind of, in his wisdom, as divine wisdom, incarnate wisdom, kind of, quote, gets out of this trap, because in saying, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, give to God what belongs to God, it's rooted in this reality that, Jesus is basically saying this coin has Caesar's image imprinted on it. That means it belongs to him. So give it back to him. It's okay. You can do that without violating any type of religious, observance. But then how does this connect to us? And his response, give to God what belongs to God. How does that come into play? It's because of this, because when Jesus says, whose image or whose likeness do you find on that coin? That, like I said, it's the Greek word icon. It's the same word that's used back in Genesis 1:27, where God speaks about making us in his what? Image and likeness. And so think about this. On that coin was stamped the image of Caesar. In our very being is stamped the image of God, our Creator. And how is that image stamped in us? Because we have an intellect and a will just like God. That is what makes us in his image. And we are to become in his likeness. But the foundation of humanity is the fact that we are made in God's image. We reflect him in some way. It's like he took us, like in giving us a rational soul, an intellect and a will, it's like he stamped his being, if you will, in our very humanity. And so Jesus is basically saying that, okay, this coin belongs to Caesar, but we as human beings belong to God. And so therefore, we can give a little coin back to Caesar, but we are called to give our life back to God. In other words, we owe Caesar a little coin, but we owe God our very life. And in that way, you have the hierarchy of goods, where yes, we are called to, honor civil authority, to serve, in the civil life, but not over and against the overarching call, which is to give our life back to God in service and in worship. That's at the core of our foundation as human beings. So no matter what society we find ourselves in, that is always the priority. Give to God what belongs to God. And the word render basically means surrender, to give back. This is what we are called to do, to give back to God our life in serving Him. And that becomes priority really for the building of any successful country. Any country that subverts that is a doomed country, is doomed. I want to share with you something. I had this book. This is Archbishop, he's a retired Archbishop now, it's Charles Chaput. He's one of the great bishops in America, very smart. He wrote a book called Render Unto Caesar. This was back in, I think, 20-something. 20, don't see it on here, but it was back, I think, prior to 2012. Maybe it was 2009. Or no, 2008. I think that's what it was. 2008, he had a second edition. But anyway, in his preface to the second edition, he wrote this, okay? So he says, our first governor is God, our creator, the governor of the universe. We are created for a religious purpose. We have a religious destiny. Our right to pursue this destiny precedes the state. Any attempt to restrict our right to worship, preach, teach, practice, organize, and peacefully engage society because of our belief in God is an attack not only on the cornerstone of human dignity, but also on the identity of the American experience. Because this religious identity that we have, this call to worship God above all as the foundation of our life, really served as the foundation of our country. Because our country became what it has became great, so to speak, because religious men and women lived out their faith to the best of their ability to build the country on a foundation of virtue. Not perfect, but that's kind of it. And when you have in an America today where basically you have the evolution of evil being declared as good and good as being declared as evil, and there's no more expression of that than the month of June, right? The month of June is a pure slap in the face of God. Pure slap in the face of God and God's plan for humanity in regards to marriage and family and what it means to be a human being as a man or a woman. And so when you start subverting the natural law, right? The natural law is simply the order that God has inscribed into creation, that beautiful harmony and order, and God has given us as human beings through our intellect the ability to understand that. It's rooted in our very nature. And when we live according to that, there's peace and prosperity. When we go against it, there's disaster. I mean, look at Israel. The Ten Commandments are an expression, by the way, of the natural law. And when every time Israel went against the Ten Commandments and against the covenant laws that they were supposed to follow, disaster followed. But when you follow God's law, you surrender to it, you give God what is His due in worship and in service, then we are blessed. We're blessed. And so nowhere do we see in the American experience in this day and age a slap in the face of that. than the month of June. And this is to understand that I get there's problems, that people have confusions and all that stuff. I get it, and I have great compassion for that. But one person's struggle, you don't change laws, just because there's like a minority who might be struggling with certain issues. It doesn't mean all of a sudden you change God's laws. No, it's you use God's laws to help a person. But we never compromise the truth of God, because when we live out of that truth, the truth will set us free. Set us free. And so this gospel passage today carries with it, a very deep truth. And it's the relationship between the church and the state. That's the deep truth. And it's really the relationship between God's authority versus the authority of the state. And God's authority always trumps that of the state. But when the state is seen to be divine, when the state begins to be worshiped as if it were divine, then you have problems. And that's where we're kind of venturing into here in America. So may the words of Jesus today ring into our hearts. May his wisdom speak into our hearts today, especially about the truth of how God has made us in his image to become in his likeness. This is our destiny. This is our purpose. And we are to fulfill this purpose living in the world, living in a civil society. But religion is never meant to be a private affair. Never. Don't ever believe that. Religion is never meant to be privatized. The separation between church and state, as people try to make it today, is false. We are meant to live our faith in the public square. In the public square. If you are a layperson, whatever God has called you to do in your life, you are to live your Catholic faith trying to be a leaven in whatever part of society that you have influence in. This is what God has called us to. We're not meant to sit on the sideline and think of this like, oh, I can believe this in my private life, but I'm a politician, so I can completely subvert God's laws, because privately I believe them, but publicly I have to perform in this certain way because I'm a certain political persuasion. That's bogus, ridiculous. So anyway, I could go on, but I think we all get the point. Let us appreciate what God has stamped into our very humanity, this call to worship him and him alone, and to serve him above all things, so that this world can become a thriving humanity, a thriving place, because God is love. And when we follow God's love, or when we follow God's laws faithfully, love will flourish. When we go against them, love will not flourish. It will not. So we ask Jesus for his help. Bless us, Lord, and help us to be faithful to you, to be faithful Catholics and true citizens of the United States of America.